the real need for community. And that's really what my bureau leads within the Edmonton Police Service. They focus on community safety and well-being. The pandemic has actually forced us to really be separated from everything that is beautiful about being in society, being able to connect, being able to talk to one another, being able to hug. And I don't think we quite realized and appreciated the fact that that is going to have a real psychological, mental, physical detriment to individuals and society as a whole. For us within policing and for the bureau that I lead, it's ensuring that as a police service, we're working with our social partners to ensure that we can get people who have unmet needs to needs that to services that are really going to help them thrive. And that's really the biggest thing that we're trying to do as a service. How do you prevent crime, ensuring that folks who otherwise don't have these needs met are really getting driven to the services that they are going to, this effective services. So with that, that's really what we're going to be focusing on as we try to move past this pandemic.
That's great information. This is Enyinnah Okere. He is the Chief Operating Officer of the Edmonton Police Service. And what a big job that must have been over the last few years. I really have to say how much we appreciate you. Thank you for joining us. And this is Leadership Line of Sight. In fact, my name is Taylor. I am the Marketing Strategist at Gravidia. And with me, as always, is Scott Connors, the Chief Change Officer at Crankset Group, helping leaders make changes in their companies because, man, we're going to need some changes. This has been a heavy week, and it's been uncertain times to begin with. And I think that that's maybe one of the things that I'd like to open the show with. I know this is something very important to Scott, and as I'm sure that you would share, and as you feel such a draw to serve the community, is that we're going to ask, like, all of our communities are going to be thinking about what's happening in Russia right now, what's happening around China right now. These things are progressing by the minutes and hours in ways that they're just incredible. And so I really feel it's important to say that this is something that is on all of our thoughts and weighs heavy with all of us today and every day as the world leaves what we know as peace for the time being.
Heavy hearts for the people of Ukraine, no question. Solidarity, we're seeing it. We wish them well, Godspeed. And I know, and yeah, you'll appreciate this. If police officers get called to the scene of a crime, then effectively the job has failed because we're in the crime prevention business. Mm-hmm. And I hope the whole world will listen to that and rally around and hoping that we can pull Russia backwards instead of forwards.
Yeah, I mean, you gentlemen said it perfectly. It's wild to see in real time the devastation that's also happening, and for us to be able to see it all the way across the world and seeing windows shattering, children in neonatal units, like the basic necessities that and I want to say we take for granted here, but like we're not experiencing that, and it's absolutely heartbreaking that you're living under this tension, and now the reality of troops invading the country, it's horrific. So absolutely, your thoughts go to Ukraine, and hopefully this can be resolved much sooner than later, because this has already gone way too far.
Yeah, I'd like to bring it back closer to home. Let's bring it back to Edmonton. Mm-hmm. I was there last week for the first time ever. I was in Canada for the first time ever. I learned quickly that I'm not in Canada. I'm in Alberta. I get it now. I get it. I've also learned that Rogers Place in downtown is a really eclectic place to go, and I got to go to an Oilers game, and I want to just say to you, and then hopefully you will translate to the rest of your force, that in the whole week that I was there, in the limited times that I did see police presence, and in the limited times that I did interact, like being ushered into the stadium and afterwards and around downtown as I toured, one of the CEOs of my clients gave me a tour around town. First class, first rate, completely professional, smiles on their faces. You could see it in their eyes through their masks. So I just want to congratulate you and your department for, from my experience, a week as an American in Edmonton, absolutely impressed by what you guys are doing at the municipal level when it comes to serving as police officers.
I very much appreciate that and can't take credit for that. We have great people working in this organization, great women and men who decide to serve and help this community. And that is, your experience is one that I'm thankful that is shared by many. So I'm glad you got to experience that as a visitor to Edmonton, and hopefully you didn't jinx the Oilers, because it's been kind of touch and go here for a little bit. So
no, we crushed the Ducks, so no jinx there, right? Yeah. But I will say, please thank that female officer when I was crossing the street when I probably shouldn't have been doing that. Please thank her for allowing me to go back to the curb in a very nice manner. I'm thankful for that as well.
No, and that'll be something that will pass on. But that's the first-rate service that we expect. I'm proud to say that is repeatedly delivered here within the city of Edmonton. But thank you very much for the feedback. It's nice to hear those kinds of things once in a while.
Good.
So this is something I find interesting, and you've helped police in several different communities, and you see it from the inside. One of the things that we got to talk about a little bit prior to the show was how you see policing and how you see their role inside the community. Can you expand on that a little bit? Like, as someone who is working on the deliverables of the Edmonton Police Service, what does that look like to the citizens here?
An empowered community. So if we're able to really integrate with the community that we serve, really champion, and especially for the work that I do, champion our partners who are driving in the same direction to try to get collective outcomes for folks who've been on the margins of our society. If we can do that together, that's changing the game. Being able to drive and work with the community, really be underneath the community, be one with the community, is really my focus. But that is the focus of the service. That you are still going to need the folks who have to provide enforcement and heavy and hard enforcement. But there's also, like for us, a strategic goal is to balance support and enforcement. If we're able to do that together, and for me, working that, especially with that support side with the community, that's really where policing is going to go in the future. Because for some of the things that we're seeing, you're not going to be able to arrest your way out of it, but it's still important that you have a police presence working with other professionals who work within this space. So we're not trying to fix things that historically have taken 100 years to get here within different budget silos, as opposed to giving citizens what they need, which is working as an integrated team together. So that's really where we're going, and you're going to continue to see us go as a police service.
So my wife is an emergency nurse at the Royal Alexandra Hospital, which is the inner city downtown hospital in Edmonton. Yeah. And on occasion, she has somebody come in who is often with a child, and they do have real concerns, right? And they're like, my child's got a temperature, or they've been sick by this long. But the next thing out of their mouth is, but we do not want any drugs. And that puts her as a medical professional in a tough position, because what do they do outside of medicine? Like that's the solution they're ready to provide. And you touched on something interesting. A lot of policing services are they're being asked to do things that are outside their capacity, right? Like they don't have you're saying, you can't arrest your way out of this. So if you look at your world, if you look at yourself like a hammer, the world becomes a nail.
Yep.
And so what do you think, how is that changing?
Through iteration, through working together. So the best parts about being in a city is there's that cultural exchange. Why would that not matter when it comes to the different kind of allied professionals working with a shared client? And the clients that your wife will see on a nightly basis, I would hazard a guess that some of them were dropped off by some of our members and police officers here from the EPS. So we're working with the same people. So why do we need to look at it within respective silos? I learn from other exec directors of social organizations in terms of the skills and the experiences they have when it comes to working with the same client that we have. So yes, we do have powers of arrest, but there's also powers that the police service has in terms of really managing the intake into the justice system and being able to work with our partners to be an effective governor of, is this someone that really should be in jail and this is a danger to the community? Or is this someone who is down on their luck, or someone who's committing these offenses due to the fact that they have an unmet need, and we can actually now try to get to that root cause. But in order to expand that lens, you also need to have other folks kind of in the tent with you that have their diverse skill sets that we can piggyback upon, and then really serve the clientele in a much more fulsome manner.
There's a great book that was written by General Stanley McChrystal a few years back now, called Team of Teams. And that's what I hear you describing, as a team of teams with a common shared purpose of serving the community and the greater good, and forming those strategic alliances. Almost sounds like that's a part of your job.
Yes, it is. You got it, man.
Tell us more about that. How does that feel to walk into the hospital and have those meetings with the other side? What sort of receptivity do you get?
I'm happy to say much better now. A lot of the work that we were doing in 2020 in terms of trying to build those teams is, while you're within the context of the kind of global social justice movement regarding the space policing should be in. But what I've been really proud to see, even with all that noise, was dedicated professionals in the social service sector that realize that we need one another. Like, we can't do this alone. We are 24/7 services. We do have specific, powers and capacities. But if we're trying to address this for the long term and improve community safety and well-being within the city of Edmonton, then we need to be working with these partners. So it's laying out the case, and also it's a lot of trust building as well. Doing that in a pandemic, and we're doing this podcast via stream, but I'm sure you found that there is no technological substitute for the human condition of actually wanting to be in the same room together and chatting and connecting and feeling that energy. So building this during the pandemic also made that difficult, but we have been making strides, and I'm very proud of kind of what we've been seeing with the results of putting those teams of teams together.
Well, and in this age of coming back to more, face-to-face opportunities is coming. In fact, you're doing an event this weekend. Can you expand a little bit more about that? This is super interesting.
Yeah, bro, I'm really excited about this. So part of the thing during the pandemic, as if there wasn't enough kind of work to do, was as we were having a conversation kind of globally about systemic racism or equity issues, a partner of mine who works in commercial real estate, he saw the work that we were trying to do and that I was leading at the service for community building and really building the relationship between the community and police service. For him, wondering what can he do with his talents to move this discussion to ensure that there's sustainability when it comes to these racial equity movements, was he said, listen, I know you're usually the only Black person when you kind of come into the rooms, because I am, and he's usually the only Black person in commercial real estate, like when he walks into these rooms. What can we do to change that? And for us, we're not necessarily rah-rah, like picket people. That's not me. But we recognize that we have blessings by the virtue of the spaces that we're in. And if you're an outlier, what's your job? Open the door for other people. So what we're doing is we started a nonprofit that is going to be focused on getting BIPOC, so Black, Indigenous, and people of color youth within the commercial real estate space. So we're going to be kicking off an 8-week program for these youth that they're going to be connecting and learning about commercial real estate, because I didn't know anything about that growing up. And in fact, when I immigrated here, my sole role was either to be a doctor or a lawyer. And if you're number 3, you're a disappointment. And so I can have this job, fancy title, Chief Operations Officer. My mom doesn't know what I do, nor I'm sure cares. She can't brag to the homies back home about, like, my son's really made it. So how do we get folks who don't know about this world in terms of commercial real estate to understand it? It doesn't mean you have to go work as an adjuster or anything like that post high school. And you see, I'm picking up the lingo because working through the curriculum post high school, but you're now aware of what's happening within your community, and you have that power. So you don't have to be juiced in like most folks are, because you just have that awareness. what I've been very, very excited about is the fact that within the city of Edmonton, there have been so many different organizations, corporations who spoke about their commitment to kind of equity issues and have now supported us in making this happen. So not only are they going to have an 8-week curriculum, it's going to end with a case competition where they're going to compete against one another. And good folks at Altus Group have also put up scholarship prizes for these youth so that it's not just you're learning, because you can't convince me just to learn on my weekends at 16, 17, but there will actually be some tangible prizes that they can leave with as well to honor their time and their commitment to this. So this is really kind of a lot of different things coming together, but the blessing of kind of when you're an outlier and you're able to kind of see that, you have a responsibility now to start opening doors for other folks. So that's kicking off this Sunday.
Incredible. Scott, there you are. Oh,
I love
there you
that.
are.
Yeah, I was on mute because I wanted to make sure I didn't interrupt that. I love that. I love that. I have to say, the racial conversation is a difficult one and an uncomfortable one. And one of the things that we've been working on in large corporations is to make sure that a lot of the white people in this world are embarrassed. Obviously, not all. We still have a long way to go to make everybody love and respect people as people. Color, creeds, religion, irrelevant. We are people.
Mm-hmm.
We have ears, we have eyes, we have noses, we have mouths. We are one people. Mm-hmm. And part of that is the shame, I think, that comes from the Caucasian side of the equation of how ashamed and embarrassed a lot of us are when we see some of the activities of white people. And in America, and by the way, living in Oregon, I get told by my Canadian friends all the time, it feels like they live on top of a frat house. So I own that. But we need to do a better job of bringing that side of the communication into the room as well. Equality means communication. I believe in the boardrooms that I'm in, we're talking about communicate. Let's talk about this. Mm-hmm. We've got to get this dialogue started. And trust, as you well know, is built by shared experiences. Let's share these experiences, right? Let's share it.
Oh, I 100% agree. This is done through dialogue. And for me, when I say I'm not an activist, that has a role in terms of activating the conversation. But in any relationship, anytime that you grow, anytime you learn something, experience something, for me, I found in my personal experience, it's come through creating a psychologically safe environment so that we can have this kind of conversation. You can tell me about your experience. That doesn't mean that I've experienced it. It doesn't even necessarily mean that I have to agree, but how do we validate one another in terms of this is what you've experienced, and then let's talk about the barriers for someone like me or someone who might be on the margins to get the opportunity to succeed. That doesn't mean that we all have to end up in the same place. I'm an equality of opportunity person, not equality of outcome. So let's talk about let's remove those invisible or structural barriers that are precluding me or precluding someone from actually taking full part in society, in civilization, in your corporation. And then everything that comes from there is your own industry, but you need to do that in a way that people are willing to listen and not in an aggressive, very kind of domineering way, because that might feel good for the release in terms of if I'm doing that and I'm just yelling, it might feel good in terms of a release for me, but what does that do for the next person that wants to have this conversation, wants to go about it in a meaningful way? I'm actually now precluding people from being allies because they shut down at this kind of conversation instead of really trying to connect. So when doing that, definitely have a responsibility for, am I actually driving this to create future allies for people who are on the margins, or am I doing this for a emotional release for myself or a platform? And you've probably seen a little bit of that as well. So
yeah, it's so often missed that what people want is a great experience and they don't know how to recognize it. Like, you're doing such a good job by being visible because by talking to you and so many people that I've worked with from so many different backgrounds, like, one, I get to cover my blind spots.
Yes.
You know, like I live in a certain spot and I can only draw from my own experience, but I end up having a lot of gaps because of that case.
Mhm.
And by surrounding myself with people that don't come from the same place, don't often necessarily speak the same way or look the same way, it ends up being that we get a better rounded experience overall.
Mhm.
But sometimes when we think of all the examples that we have in our life of the people that have been successful, we don't understand that when we're referring to minorities, there's not a chance for them to have equal representation because there's not this big a group. So if you have like 100 examples, you might end up with 10 great examples, and that's like consistent with the population. But what we really need to do is show people that any one of these other chairs is also available for them.
Yes.
That it's not just these 10 chairs are for you and the rest of these chairs aren't for you. It's like, no. This is like, our population is made up like this, and all of these chairs are open to the people that can really exchange value well. But in order to exchange value these days, you got to be visible.
No,
Right?
I agree. You got to be visible and willing, and like truly willing. But like, even with those chairs, I really like what you're saying there, because I think the biggest thing that I think about when we're talking about kind of those positions is a real scarcity mentality, that I break through this ceiling and now either I got to play defense against everyone else who would be trying to get to a seat like this, or I believe that this is the only chair that can be for me. And thus far, I mean, so thus I'm occupying this, and really we could expand the table. And how do we look at doing that in a way that is sustainable? So I think about today in the United States, I think Biden is going to be nominating the first Black Supreme Court justice, Black female Supreme Court justice. I think it just came out about an hour ago. I would love to get to a place where that is wholly unremarkable,
Right?
Regardless of the composition of the court. That is wholly unremarkable. And for that to happen, we just need to be focused, in my very humble view, on removing those barriers so people can succeed through their industry, as opposed to looking at that composition solely looking at the composition at the end. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. And the most difficult part of that, if you look at it from the business side of the world, which is where I live, right, and not the service side of the world where you live, but the optics are a lot alike. And here's the real tragedy is, if you were to remove all the barriers, right?
Mhm.
At the end, diversity is about hiring the very best person for the job.
Mhm.
We're all equal, and therefore we all compete equally.
Mhm.
And think about the layers that have to be removed and the barriers that exist that you're talking about, that you're looking at the barriers and I'm looking at that. What's the ideal outcome here? I mean, true diversity is pure competition. It doesn't matter what, again, race, creed, color. Are you the best person for the job?
Mhm.
And if companies can make decisions based on that, then we come from both angles, right? The top down and the bottom up, of just crushing the barriers and along the way.
Agreed. And I think what helps, and sorry, just what helps in doing those things are probably some of the things that you talk about in the boardroom, in terms of how do we address unconscious bias? How do we address those kind of structural things that may preclude people from having that opportunity to compete, and things like that, like affinity bias. I want to hire someone that looks like me, or someone who's coming from a familiar background. They could be a very qualified individual, but because I recognize what I'm seeing and I understand that, this makes this an easier fit for the organization. Once we can start addressing those little invisible things like that, that opens up that pool. Because when I say equality of the opportunity, now what you get is through your own industry, but it's not structured based on for me, I'm only going to, I feel more inclined to hire Nigerian people, or what have you, like whatever the kind of the structure is.
Yeah, No. That's awesome. But like, that's the thing that, like, it's about the unknown equaling risk, right? So one of my teammates here, she used to teach people how to bet on horses. And the basic story is that you should bet on the things that you can quantify the most, right? The more you can see the history, the more that you know about that makes the horse like kind of bright to you or known, right? And that's something that I think that Scott and we kind of tied into this before when we said if you hire people for people and view them as a startup, it doesn't mean that you create a mold and then try to fit this mold.
Yes.
Like hiring people as a job is actually what's broken, because if you're hiring them for a job, then they have to fit a profile. Yep. And the profile is based on that same thing from horse betting, where it shouldn't necessarily be that way, but these are constructs that create the biases, right?
Oh, you're speaking to it right now. I'm 34 and I am a deputy chief equivalent of a major city police service. This is unheard of, but I wouldn't be able to do the job that I do if it was meant to, if the focus was fit the archetype. And for some of the things that we talk about here is authentic inclusion. So we hire people for diversity. You look at the resume, you look at all the great things that they've done. They volunteer within their community, their backgrounds, and we think this would be a great addition to this organization. And then if you're an organization that brings them in and you don't let them leverage those things, the things that made them great and attractive to you, you don't really let that blossom. What are we doing as kind of leadership? So being able to have people be authentic to who they are and drive that is how you actually leverage the diversity that you're hiring people for.
And good luck competing with the people that understand this.
Right.
Because like that's the thing that I like the best about the way the world is changing. Is it used to be this place where you dictated what the winning team would look like, and now it's based on our creativity. It's based on who we can work with. That's the widest scope of excellence, right? Mm-hmm. And just like you were mentioning, is being embedded in a community is part of doing good business, just like it's doing good police service. Mm-hmm. I'm a big dog guy. You and I have talked about this before because you're a big dog guy too. Yeah. And I always like the way that dogs see security. Is that you see like a golden retriever and it like wags its tail when it sees you when it doesn't even know you, and it just like cruises up and it's bright, and basically the message is this: I like you. Do you like me? Mm-hmm. Now your response doesn't need to be verbal. You could stiffen up. You could be very uncomfortable, and then that dog doesn't really change that much. It's like, okay, well, I still like me, and I'm going to know where you are till you leave, right? Like that's threat assessment. But they did give a chance to get to know you, and that was actually the most valuable part of threat assessment. And so that's the same thing. The opposite of threats are opportunities. And when we profile people as either being threats or opportunities, we lose everything. Like dogs have the ability they can hear your heartbeat from 5 feet away. They can smell whether or not your blood sugar is high. You think that golden retriever really needs to come over and do that? No, there's another reason.
Yeah.
You know, Anya, you said before, what are we doing as leaders if we don't let the people that we hired for all the right reasons blossom within their culture? Mm-hmm. I believe that we reach true, authentic inclusion with a leadership mindset. When we train everyone to have a leadership mindset, they don't have to be leaders. They just have to have a leadership mindset. And a leadership mindset is about one that's consistent and transparent and humble, but it's also one that's listening to learn and listening to inspire versus to reply. And what I hear you saying, and I like the smile, I love that smile when I say this, because I feel like that's sort of your mission at the department is like, okay, we're hiring the right way, but then we're not watering the seeds. and we're not putting any sunshine on it. And now there's all these layers. It's Swiss cheese. If you put it, they got all the holes in it. But if you stack enough of them together, there's no holes, right? Right. And so that's what happens in companies like yours, in departments like yours, and in places that we go and work and live and play all over the world. Is we say the front end is okay, but then what? And that's that leadership mindset to listen to learn and look to inspire and welcome. We're so happy to have you. Where would you like to go in your career today? That methodology is, and I agree with you, is not an easy fight to fight, but it's a purposeful one, and you can see the change, can't you?
Oh, it's so important because, I mean, for us, we have the extra degree of difficulty of doing this within a paramilitary organization. And so how do you allow folks to be authentic with themselves and really bring the skills that they want to transfer to community within that construct? What we're fortunate is, as a leadership team, this is something that we're discussing on a very regular basis. And how do you not only build up the leadership, and leadership, I'm only speaking really in rank, but leadership really moves all the way from constable all the way to the chief. How do you build that and incentivize that within the organization to really bring that out of people? And that's really why you should get paid, because we should be looking at innovative ways to really draw the best out of the members who work within this organization and ensure that then that gets transferred out to the community, because we can't have hurt people policing a hurt city right now, especially with these 2 years of the pandemic. So that's really a responsibility that we take very seriously. But in terms of that, we've been driving this change, and starting to hear people speak about authentic inclusion in a police service is wild as hell to me, but it's beautiful to see this moving forward.
Thanks for being part of the change that you want to see.
Yeah,
that's amazing.
Yeah.
And also, in capping off what you were saying there, Scott, we're an example of some of the leaders in place that want to embrace this mindset. What should we look for? Where are our blind spots in our own companies and the companies near us? Like, we talked a little bit about this. Is there anywhere that you think every company can have a quick look and say, you know what, is this barrier here?
Yeah, I would think, so for our organization, we've received feedback from the community. We've been receiving a lot of feedback from the community over the last couple of years, and it's looking to find the signals, the signals that you need to pay attention through the noise. So I don't know what necessarily your feedback loops are for other respective companies, but you do know who you market to, who you speak to, who isn't there, who's not represented there, and then ask the question, why? Why are they not interested in your product? Why are they not interested in working in your organization? Perhaps they might tell you a very blunt answer, like, I don't see myself there because I don't really feel like you market to me. And that might be okay. Now you've learned something, and do we care enough about it to now take these steps? It might be also just speaking within the organization of, for the folks who are the minorities within the organization. It doesn't have to be color, women, whomever. Hey, what would it take to get more women, more people of color here? Do you see any barriers to your success? Like, it comes back to kind of what you said in the beginning. How do you have these conversations? And then from there, that really charts the course, because there's no panacea to this. Like I said, it's been 100 years or hundreds of years for us to get to this place. It's going to, all of us here are not going to see that mountaintop, but can we leave it better than we found it and really start having our respective organizations trend to those respective goals? I think we absolutely can. But with that comes with meaningful conversation and speaking to, whether it be your clientele and speaking to the folks that work within your organization, because you'd be surprised at things that they've just been holding or feeling on a day-to-day basis that they'd probably love to hear from leadership.
And I also think it's in the moments. I think that everything you're saying is absolutely true, but it's in those moments every day when we interact in society. When the Black police officer walks up to the white older lady's car and says, "Ma'am, may I see your license and registration?" And the way that interaction goes from both sides, that defines the many moments ahead. When the white female police officer walks up to the black traffic stop and says, "Good afternoon, sir, may I see your license and registration?" That moment, those moments of interaction and how we handle them as people and how we interact together. And we are so much better together. And the fact that our masks are going to start coming off now, and the fact that we can get back to being better together, I think is going to really be an accelerant to the diversity discussion, to the authentic inclusion discussion. I think we're getting ready to see some real progress towards, I saw that the first black female speed skater won an Olympic medal for the United States of America. And I thought the same thing you did. I can't wait for the day that that's not a big deal.
As an aside on that, so my wife was a figure skater when she was young, and we were in vacation up in the mountains in January, and there's nothing to do. So she wanted us to go skating. And I'll tell you, I am 250 pounds. I don't care how thick this ice is. I don't want to skate. And the only other time I've done it in my life, we were in New York, and she wanted to go to the Rockefeller Plaza where everyone's getting around, this and that. And all I saw was this little black boy who was the only one on the ice with his sisters. And he was Bambi on ice. And I started panicking because I'm like, that's going to be me, except heavier. So I survived that, and I'm like, all right, I just want to come out with this with my ACL intact, because I just don't want to feel pain in my knees when the weather changes. So we get there and we start skating, and there's chairs there. I'm not using any of that. I'm too proud. I'm an athlete. I was so bad that she took a video of it, and it went viral to the point that Apollo Ono, the Olympic speed skater, came to laugh at me. I was that poor at skating. So when she did that for me. She won that medal for me.
That's amazing. That's so funny.
It's a great story. Great
Hey,
story.
I wanted to so being that it's almost 11:30 here Mountain Standard Time, we're going to transition a little bit and talk about the leadership line of sight. There's some events that are going forth right now, and I touched on it at the top of the hour. But really, when it comes down to what's going on in Russia right now, there's a whole bunch of leaders in companies and in municipalities across North America right now that are like, hey, what is next? So really, when you see what's taking place, Scott, I want to start with you. You did a really good job of helping people outline the process of preparing for the emergency that was the pandemic. What's your advice now as as the Russian invasion scrambles through Ukraine?
There is a core value in every corporation, whether it's listed or not, and that is when you're right, you fight, and when you're wrong, you run. And as humanity working in a corporation outside of Ukraine and Russia, you have to be willing to sacrifice profit through greater expense. You have to be willing to make any balance sheet sacrifice you can to make sure that those economic sanctions are as strong as the teeth that they're supposed to have, and they bite with as much dog force as they possibly can. So you want to address the people inside your organization with that element first. Start with core values. And if it's going to cost my fuel trucks $100 a barrel in oil, then we'll pay $150 because we're going to do it together because we stand with the people of Ukraine. That's first, is we're willing to suffer economically. And we may have to ask you individuals to suffer as well. And a lot of my financials, large world-centered sort of bank Skype folks, that's the communication that I've given when asked. The second, and I think just as important, is the human piece. What can we do as a company to help the people of Ukraine? The formal work group, anybody that's interested, I'm involved as a senior leader. I want your ideas of what we could do to help the people of Ukraine. And whatever that is, let's do it. If it makes sense, let's do it. And by the way, let's be in support of our brand, and let's show the world that we stand behind the people of Ukraine under our brand ID. Because it's time to fight, because we are right. This is wrong. You don't invade another country. And then the last piece of the process is a vested interest in the outcome. How can we give back to the people of Ukraine when it's time to rebuild? What can we do to help them? So the culture of an organization starts with its core value, grounds on its humanity, and works towards an ideal outcome to support what we feel and believe is the right thing. This is a very simple example of right and wrong, of good and bad, right? This is a very simple example there. I hate to say, especially this call, and black and white. They're not different. They're the same color, so I'm not going to say it. My point being here is that that's the process for how you address it.
And what do you think, Enyinnah, when there's leadership that's taking a look at what's happening in Russia, as things unfold at this point, what do you think the moves are today and tomorrow and next week?
I think for us, I mean, we're a municipal police agency, but I'll give you a little of it. Well, I mean, Taylor, you'll know this. There's a lot of Ukrainians in Canada. We have a lot of Ukrainians, like some of my colleagues at the deputy chief level, Ukrainians, and like understanding the real helplessness that some people might be feeling, thinking about family, seeing this in real time. Like, I can't get over that enough, that you're bombarded, and pardon the language there, but like, it's a steady flow of seeing your country, seeing what might still be your family, seeing, depending on when you got here, like your childhood, seeing people going through that and the helplessness. So checking in on your people first and foremost, ensuring that they understand that that this is something that the leadership is cognizant of and understands, so that moves from, you are not just a payroll number, you're an individual. We know that this is something that you're feeling. So checking in on your people. But for us as a municipal service, also preparing for what might happen in terms of the government of Canada. So we've seen, I think it was in 2015, with the Syrian refugees coming to Canada, making steps to prepare to welcome folks like that. We've seen in Afghanistan over the last year. And if there are folks, there's an influx coming into the city of Edmonton, then how do you prepare as a police service to welcome them, understanding that they're going to be coming from some trauma, and create a fertile ground for them to hopefully succeed and integrate into society and participate as well. And that's kind of where our focus is within kind of the levers that we have, taking care of our people, making sure that they understand, they know that we got their backs when it comes to this, that we feel this. But other than that, then how do you prepare for what are unfortunately the subsequent steps that we've seen repeated from Syria 2015, Afghanistan, and making sure that you're prepared to welcome people to the best of your ability.
Yeah, honestly, I remember sitting down with some people in real estate and hearing that the gentleman had lived in a cave for about 1.5 years because he was being persecuted just near Afghanistan, and then he had come here. And I helped this young family end up buying a property here, which was amazing. And they got set up. They were so self-sufficient. Like, my help was just guidance, really. And then it didn't seem like very long, and they'd called me again, and I said, "What's going on?" And they said, "We're back." And I said, "What do you mean you're back? Like, I thought you guys were here." And they said, "No, you wouldn't believe it." And they explained to me, because like in Alberta, a lot of Albertans know about 2007. It was this like 2006, 2007. We call it the boom. Everything was going well here, right? He said, that's what was going on where I came from. And so I went back because like the good times were here. And he said, then the Taliban started running trucks through our town with a bunch of people in the back without heads. And this was the way that they would announce that they have arrived.
Uh-huh.
And like, this was a guy who already had to live in a cave for over 1 year. And it was just heart-wrenching to hear about that family, right? But these people are everywhere. It's just like you were mentioning, like Mind the Gaps. Like in the building that I used to work in, there was a Syrian that was he was the maintenance. And because I, would come in early and work late, I got to know him. And one day he came in and he said, "Hey, listen, I got a chance to work to do maintenance in another building." He said, "But I don't know how to write a proposal." And I was like, "Well, I'm handy that way. Like I actually can't do pretty much everything that you can do, but this is the thing I can do." And we went upstairs and we wrote a proposal for his next building. But like these things are like they're just everywhere around us. So knowing that the people around you that are affected by this are embedded here, I think that that's really good advice because like honestly, hurt people hurt people.
Yep.
We got to find out the people that are hurt so that we can help them, because otherwise it's just continuous.
Oh, agreed, bro.
So as we go into this next couple of weeks, I think that there's a lot of people at every level of business that are going to kind of feel pause, right? They're going to feel uncertainty. Now, in that moment, that might be a great time to collect your people as you're waiting to decide and to measure before you can manage. That might be a great way to count heads and go around and say, okay, who do we need to take care of, right? And then when we come through this, there's going to be ways that the market moves, right? Any insight on what we should be prepared for if the world is heading in the direction of conflict as far as business goes?
Well, first of all, you're going to look at worldwide stock market corrections. You're going to see massive gyrations in currency exchanges throughout the world, and those hedge against the currencies they're doing businesses that might be affected. There is going to be a tremendous amount of uncertainty around the social aspect of it, but geographically it will be defined by that very small area or battle space. And if you look at the world, and I'm not minimizing it at all. And so each individual business just needs to take a look at how it might impact. But here's some things that you can count on. Oil is going to stay above 100 to 110 a barrel. It's not going down anytime soon. Even with strategic reserves, they know that they're limited and they don't want to deplete them because they don't know how long this is going to last. Number two, increased amounts of diplomacy. But closer to us and the people that we interact with every day in work, a lot of false media, a lot of narrative which isn't real, a lot of people that are going to get very upset about some things that may turn out not to be true, and a lot of things that are true that we may not hear about it. And so I think one of the things that's important is we all find our best news source or our best source of news. And you guys know what it is up there. NPR for me is one of those sources. Al Jazeera is another one of those sources. I think they're an unbiased group. I think it's important for all of us and maybe even the folks in the department to say, are you receiving the best news available? Right? Is it true? If we're dealing with this in truisms rather versus layers of narratives that are created falsely, I think that's how we can help serve our people right now, whether we're in a corporation or in a municipality.
I think that's a great point. In fact, like I really got to get a good education this morning. I spent the morning on a social media called Clubhouse, listening to a Green Beret break down the Russian conflict. So when you take a look at social media now, the audio is everywhere. Audio is going to be the next level. Like social audio has come to LinkedIn. It's working its way through Facebook, and it started with a startup called Clubhouse. And man, I think that as an 8-person group, they were valued at $2 billion. And so what they've learned is that lots of people like to listen to podcasts like this one, right? But how many times have you been in your car yelling at the radio? Because you want to interact, right? So yesterday, I ended up coming into an interaction with a race car driver that drives now for Porsche. And once they were done their podcast, they had a bit of a Q&A. So I got to ask him a little bit about his progression. I was asking him about like the parts that were sticky, because when you're a race car driver and you're going through the phases, when you find the limits of the car, it means you crash a lot. And then this morning, somebody brought in a Green Beret specifically for this to talk about what we're actually seeing, what he thinks it is. And one of the big questions was, where do you get your news? I like that you mentioned a couple of places, Scott, and I really thought his response was so interesting. And what he says is, take it everywhere. You need to know what CNN is saying, what Fox is saying, what all of these places are saying, and go direct to the source like I was able to and get it from a Green Beret, because we're in the age of information. And in the world of the blind, the one-eyed man was king. And in the age of information, the person that has insight, that's the king.
Yeah.
That's interesting you say that. I came across this app, and I'm not doing a plug for it because I'm not paying for it, but it's called Ground News. And really what it does, it's on my phone, it shows different headlines and different articles, but it shows it from the left of center, how it's categorized. And then you can scroll and you can look at it, how it's categorized from, say, a centrist view. And then you can look at the same story and the headlines that's written from a different organization from right of center. And what's interesting about that is where you get to see the whole kind of the gamut of how the same story can be torqued depending on the purview of who's looking at it. But you can also see what's not being covered. Like if something is covered by the center and the right, but the left isn't paying attention, or something is covered by the left and the center and the right's not paying attention, and ask those questions of why is this interesting? Like, why is there no focus on this? So yeah, it's been very interesting. It's been blowing up my phone with this last couple of days.
What's the app called?
It's called Ground News.
Okay,
And
Ground News, spelled like it sounds.
Yeah, spelled exactly as it sounds.
Okay, and so I used to own a startup called Trend Gorilla, and Trend Gorilla took the information off Google Trends, and in one screen would allow you to understand why something was trending now.
Interesting.
Yeah, it was kind of a neat trick at it. And while we were doing that, I asked if we could find a way to color code the internet. And they're like, what are you talking about? Which is the way a lot of my conversations start. And what I explained is like, imagine if you could read an article, and if the article used like psychologically, you could definitely rank words as positive or negative.
Mm-hmm.
So if it was a positive article, maybe it would appear green. If it was a negative article, maybe it would appear red. Maybe if it was balanced, it would appear purple. But wouldn't it be like, when you take a look at how influence works, and as someone who is a professional negotiator, this is a big part of my deal. It's all like all influence is based on you not seeing it. As soon as you reveal influence, as soon as you reveal an alternate agenda, the influence is no longer effective. Like, do you notice how when somebody's trying to compel you and you know that they have an interest in this, that suddenly they're not as influential?
Yeah, it's commission breath.
Yes, that's exactly what it is, right? And lots of salespeople can use that commission breath so well that they can talk a dog off a meat wagon. That's exactly it. So this is really neat, because you're saying that Ground News decided to look at it a different way, and the way that they chose to solve the puzzle reveals gaps, which is probably more important than anything else.
What's interesting for you is that, I don't know if I can show it, but it actually color codes it too. Like if you see red is left, white center, blue right.
Interesting.
So it actually does hit the color code if you download just to mess around with it.
I love that they made the red the left and the blue the right.
Yeah, reversed it.
I love that.
That's
I love that. I love that. When you first said it, I thought you got that wrong. I said, no, they got it right. That's awesome.
Do you guys know what a psychometrician is?
Oh, pardon me?
Psychometrician? It's the people that write polls and like multiple choice tests.
Mm-hmm.
They're like where math meets psych. And I'm wondering if this is something that was measured out to say that reversing that is going to make people look twice, right? That's super interesting.
Mission accomplished.
Right. But to be fair, in Canada, if you look at it based on political parties, the Liberals here are red, Liberal red, and then the Conservatives, Tory blue. So it's backwards in the United States. But
whoa. What if it's location services driven and Scott pulls it up in America and it's reversed?
It's the other way.
I don't want to be disrespectful and go get my phone off the floor and start downloading an app. But I will say this: leave it to the American in the room to assume that we're the only way to get it right and that they got it wrong. Just leave it to the American. Well done. I'll take that one on the chin. Thank you very much.
I got to tell you that that American culture has such influence over Canadians that earlier this week we had one of the representatives of the group that was doing like a public I'm losing the word here, the truckers that went down to Ottawa, the Occupy, the protest. So one of the protesters, when she cited the First Amendment. The First Amendment in Canada is when Manitoba became a province.
That judge or the JP was a savage for it too, because
wow.
it's like, yeah, this is my First Amendment right. And then the judge was like, you're what? He's like, your First Amendment. And the judge pressed on it and was like, well, what do you mean? He's like, well, I don't follow politics or anything. I just thought it was my right to be able to do this. I didn't know this was illegal. I'm like, oh, goodness me.
Yeah,
but that judge was a savage. You're what?
You're what? Oh. Yeah.
That's crazy.
You know, I do like the civil disobedience. I don't like the disruption of commerce. I think there's a fine line. I think the message got lost a little bit there, and I hope it didn't. And that it wasn't that they were anti-vaccine as much as anti-mandate. At least in what we're seeing down here. I will say this about having just visited Canada. You say that America is a big influence on Canadians. I'd really like the Canadians to come down here to America and do some influencing on, like, say, how to drive correctly and politely. Number one, how to say please and thank you and be gracious and humble, both in hosting and in welcoming. I think we could take a lot from Alberta and from Edmonton if we could just bring them down here, because we could use a lot of help. I think there's a lot we can learn from Canadians, and I'll say it again. It was a pleasure and an honor to be in that country and in Alberta, and I'm looking forward to returning. And I'm bringing my wife and child with me next time I come.
That's excellent. And I agree with you on the driving. I remember my first time in Miami. That was like a final destination experience the whole time. I agree with you 100% on the driving.
Yeah. And Miami's a good introduction. It's not the best. Go to New York City or Boston or Chicago. I'll just start naming them. LA. I mean, just when I get on an on-ramp in America, there's this moment of, is he going to let me on? Is she not going to let me on? Is she going to let me on? Right? There's that moment. Here, everyone just kind of goes, on you go. In Edmonton, on you go. There you go. Right there you go.
I have to say I'm acclimated, but in reverse. Like, I actually like driving with in the States, because everybody, I can just trust that they're going to be aggressive, and they will be, right? What you see is what you get. Like, I went to Boston, they must service the horns there.
Yeah.
You must actually break them with use.
Yeah.
Well, I wonder if there's warranties.
Honking zones, because people are using it and pounding it.
Right.
So
No honking zones.
Unbelievable, right? And so, when you look at all those places now, here, everybody seems polite, and then you'll go to move over, and somebody will just hammer the throttle, and all of a sudden, pull up right beside you. It'll surprise you. But I want you to know that Alberta is actually viewed as being aggressive by comparison to the rest of Canada when it comes to our driving. Like, Alberta drivers are renowned for the same thing that you're praising them for.
That's
relativity.
Not through these eyes. Not through these eyes.
So now I got to ask, and you're originally from Nigeria, right?
Yeah, boss.
So if you had if you were cruising around, you got options like where Scott lives and so on. Why Edmonton?
So I immigrated here when we were a child. My father was finishing his doctorate at the University of Guelph. So we started in Ontario and then moved out to Saskatchewan and stayed there for a few years. For high school, my introduction to the workforce, I started working at the legislature in Saskatchewan. I was the chief of staff in the government of Saskatchewan. And then this opportunity opened to move to Edmonton to really focus on that work on service. So it was really just kind of chance, being lucky that being able to come to Canada, being able to grow up in Canada and kind of have that mix of, you remember your experiences back home, and still even in your home within Canada, you're raised as a Nigerian, but I was still able to take part in the cultural exchange that happens in this country when you're an immigrant, and you have that the work ethic, but you also have the opportunity to succeed. So even coming to Edmonton, it's been a city and a community that's been very welcoming to my wife and I, and it's been boundless opportunities. So it really just feels like it's been a blessing. So why Edmonton? Edmonton's been great to us.
That's awesome. And you know what? I consider it a benefit to all of us that we were able to recruit you here. Because talent can come from anywhere in the world. And the fact that you traveled so far to apply your skills and talents here, that's meaningful to us. So Now, as we look forward here over the next couple of weeks, I imagine that we're waiting for some things to kind of pan out, right? Because just like we are talking about consuming news, based on what we've seen from the beginning of any other conflict, you could probably assume that if you feel as though you're knowledgeable right now on what's happening in the Ukraine, basically 85% of what you know is totally wrong. Okay, like almost always, the first takes from every major media during an initial conflict is incorrect. So assuming that we're going to get some news, like what do you see in the next couple of weeks as we close off here for another episode of Leadership Line of Sight? Is there any advice you have to leaders of what to watch for? Are there any green flags or red flags that are in your mind?
Is that to me?
You can start, Scott. You can dig in. Let's start with you, Enyinnah.
Checking on your people and trying to filter out the signals from a lot of the noise. I think you're 100% right. I mean, right now, I've watched people on social media move from epidemiologists to now foreign policy experts. And these are the same people who were epidemiologists or vaccine experts just a few months back. So trying to run with that is going to be dangerous. So really just grounding yourself in taking care of those around you and just understanding that everyone's kind of living in this malaise is really all you can do until the facts kind of bear out. So you're not jumping out the window based on the advice of some bot farm in Chechnya.
Totally. And that's the craziest thing is how much information is actually like there specifically to confuse you.
Yeah.
Right. Like when you're in an open environment, anything can happen. And I think a lot of people don't really realize that because they just think it won't happen here. I think that's great. Great advice.
Empathy, 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 empathy. See it through their eyes. Have the conversation. How does this affect you? How do you feel about this? What are your concerns about this? See it through their eyes. You can keep the communication open. Make it a resource center if you need to inside of a corporate environment. Tremendous amount of trauma. Tremendous amount of anxiety. There are families, and I met with two Ukraine families while I was in Edmonton. You're right, gentlemen. There's a lot of Ukrainians there. And what news are they getting? But it's about empathy. How does this affect you? How do you feel about this? Is there anything that we can do to help you? If you lead with empathy through these days, the next 2 to 4 weeks as things become more clear, and hopefully if we all pray hard enough, whether you're religious or not, pray for de-escalation, because the last thing that we want is continued war. But if we lead with empathy, we lean into our people and we see how it's affecting them, we're doing the best work we can do as leaders. We're giving them the best opportunity to have a place to talk about it and start to heal, even if the healing process has yet to begin.
And my advice with over the next couple of weeks is to manage what's within your reach. So like a lot of the time we think about what's going on in these far off places, and that's obviously unreachable to us. And it's frustrating that this can't be helped. But really, when you take a look at life, like 95% is how you react to it. But what if you didn't react? What if you actually managed your reactions so that you responded instead of reacting? When we think about reaction, we're normally thinking about people that are escalated, like the people we were joking about in traffic. Those are road rage tendencies. But the reason that they're road rage tendencies is because the people that are driving the cars are actually the closest that they get on the daily to injury or death. So because they feel higher risk, they're actually having these responses that are escalated. And we've seen this translate during COVID, because when everyone can see threats inside all of us around them, they start to feel the same way that somebody in a car does. And they also start to look at everybody like us or them. You ever notice how everybody going slower than you is an idiot and everybody going faster than you is a maniac? Why are you the one who's setting normal? And so if we just take a moment and say, okay, I'm going to manage myself. I'm going to manage my own reaction. I'm going to help maintain calm in the people around me and be the foundation that they can lean into. Then I can do the same thing they tell you on the airplane. I can make sure that my oxygen is fit appropriately before I go to help someone else. Well, thank you so much for coming by today and spending some time with us. This has been Leadership Line of Sight, and we had a special guest today, Enyinnah Okere. the Chief Operating Officer of the Edmonton Police Service, doing amazing things in our community and helping our community fill those gaps with the talent and skills of people just like him, the people that are new Canadians, no matter where they came from, coming here to form a life. And I think that so many people look at that as people coming to take here. People that live in a community, they're net positive. Like the humans are the highest resource, and you're such a great example. So thank you for joining us today. I'm also joined, as always, by Scott Connors, Chief Change Officer of Crankset Group, helping leaders make changes. And if what's going on in the world right now is leading you to uncertainty, and you know there's changes coming, you should definitely get in touch with Scott Connors. And myself, my name is Taylor, and I'm the Marketing Strategist of Gravidia. I'm a serial entrepreneur, and I really champion the family business and all the families in my province and everywhere else. And so we appreciate everyone that took time to spend a little bit of time with us today, and we hope to see you next week. Cheers.